So one of the things that's happening right now in AI is different countries that have completely different ideologies um, are approaching the power of AI in different ways. So is the power accruing to the corporations? Is it accruing to individuals? Is it accruing across to the state? And how do they exercise that? And a really good example of that is the difference between the way China is regulating AI versus the Europeans versus the US. Very, very different approaches. And so the power of AI comes in, but it is not at all deterministic. It's the way in which the society uses it to either further or be agnostic about its own goals. And what's happening right now is countries like China are using it to further their goals as a society, and countries like the US are essentially stepping back because of the value of individual liberty and not using it. But in that process, they're destroying some of the fabric of the society, and we'll talk about that again. What does it look like?
We'll take another 30 seconds to cast your vote, and if you don't get to vote on this one, there are other opportunities to chime in as well.
So while we're waiting for you just to finish the voting, one thing I want to emphasize is that in the last 5 sessions, we have looked at a number of different opportunities. And in general, what we've tried to do is to show you the power of the technology, to say, here's how you create a movie, here's how you create a business plan, here's how you create a business around left-handed coffee cups, and so on. But it's been, the feel of the things has been positive. See these amazing things that you can do. Today's session's a little bit different in that I'm taking, we've already seen a lot of the positive attributes of generative AI, and I'm taking the opposite side. So you'll see some of the risks and some of the ways in which it could go wrong for all of society. McKinsey, can we see?
Yes, I will screen share the results. We have a lot of moving pieces here, but we can see most of the votes have been cast in the upper right-hand corner, and someone commented in the chat that it will be a rocky climb to get there. We have a lot of work to do, so let's discuss.
Terrific. So, I think this is an optimistic group, and I'd be curious about what you think at the end of the presentation, as opposed to the beginning of the presentation. So what I'm going to do is let me walk through a set of slides about different dimensions on which AI is affecting the world. And so let me go back to sharing. So is my screen up?
Yes.
Okay, great. So if you think about this, if I look at the results over here, there was a number of people on 2. And sort of the axis went, 2, and then 1 and 3 had a few in different ways. But if you think about what this means, if you assume that AI is an extremely powerful tool for exertion of influence, for information, for control, for all of those things, then box 1 is totalitarian systems. So it's where China goes in, gets all of the data, it runs, it gets to know each of the citizens and what it's doing, and can exert that control. So it's not so great for the individual if you have values like Western liberal values, but the state can do things that it could never, ever do before. So you go back to Stalin and think about, Stalin wants to control everybody, or the kings in France want to control everybody. They just never had the technology to do it. And now what you have is this amazing technology that can track what everyone is doing all the time. And as we add biology to it, it then can even say what you're thinking. And so if you want to exert control over a population, it is the perfect way to do it. And gradually what you can start to do is to change people's minds. That's never been possible before. 2 is the democratic, democratic with a small d world that we're getting to now, and that's where you'd want to be. My assessment, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is speculation, and so is that where we are today is 3, and one of the risks is that both 1 and 3 go into 4. So if you imagine the Chinese controlling their 100,000 party members across the whole system, each one of them has to be evaluated, they have to be promoted or demoted, they have to be given assignments and so on. And the great leader then wants to make sure that this is being done according to a set of rules, according to a set of values, so on. And the AI becomes the way in which you do it. And so after a certain period of time, if you've been following the different models, what you start to get is AI is actually making the choices. But no one knows how the system works fully because these systems are not transparent and they're just too big. And so it's taking all of the data and it's saying, General, this thing should be promoted. This one is doing things that are a little bit beyond the party. And so what you're going is from humans controlling the system, you're going to an algorithm controlling the system. And as we go through this, I'd like you to think a little bit about what does it mean to have algorithms control a system. Some of you might know this, but in the US at the state level, a large number of critical decisions, how benefits are allocated, who gets promoted, how parole is given in the justice system, just a variety of things are now done completely by algorithm, and they're completely not transparent. I'll give you one example of that. And so what happens is when these systems go in, after a little while, you justify the system by eliminating all the people who were behind it. And so then no one understands what's actually happening. The system comes out and says, this person should get this much, or this person is cheating on their on their parole and needs to be put in jail. And we don't have systems around all of that. And so I'm going to talk about these things. We started with a poll. Because there's such a diversity of opinions on what's going to happen to society as a result of AI, I'm going to show you 7 or 8 different people who have different perspectives. These are all really smart, people with great knowledge about what these technologies can do. And to give you a sense of the spectrum of views that exists right now. And then I'm going to address the 4 most dangerous words in investing, which is this time is different. So if you think about the Industrial Revolution, you think about a variety of other big shifts, the microchip coming on, is AI really different from those big shifts that have occurred? Nuclear is often used as an analog. And then I'm going to go into a series of examples of how AI has been affecting society in different ways. Many of them are social media related because those platforms run entirely on algorithms. Then a short discussion about, we've talked mostly about information, but going into biology and going into warfare, how is it affecting things there? And end with a couple of broad observations on, things that will happen. So let me start with Mark Andreessen. Mark Andreessen, VC, probably Andreessen Horowitz has the most investment in AI for any VC firm. And so they are big backers of AI as they were for crypto and so on. And, he has, I read his comments. He wrote a 7,000-word paper a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, that described his view of it. And, he says this is the most important, and sort of, if you read this, you'd say we should all stop what we're doing. We should immediately get on the AI bandwagon. We should write to our Congress people and have them do it, because everything here is so positive. It would change society. It would change our ability to earn. It would do all of these things. And he makes a set of cogent arguments around it. He uses historical analogies and so on. And so that's one end, right? He looks at this and he says, this is the most amazing thing that has happened, certainly in our lifetimes, maybe in all human history. And this is going to change everything in ways that we could not imagine. that every child is going to have a personal tutor, every person is going to have an assistant who knows everything in the world, et cetera, et cetera. So what he's doing is he's taking the progress that's occurred in AI, and he's projecting out saying, there's a range of positive scenarios that could happen. I don't know exactly when, I don't know exactly how it's going to happen. There's going to be creativity, productivity, personalization, discovery of new things. We're going to have better security. We're going to have all of these things. And his argument is, don't do stuff right now to prevent this from happening. Don't be a Luddite. Don't do the people who broke the looms way back when. So then, probably the two most important people in AI, the CEOs of DeepMind and OpenAI. So Demis is currently running all of Google's AI, and Sam, working with Microsoft, now has Reach. They have much more nuanced views of how this is going to affect society. Both of them have been quite vocal. Sam was in class, and he was talking about the way he thought about the power of society, of AI. And I still remember his saying that today, between the smartest person in a collection and the median person, there might be 2 standard deviations or so on whatever measure of intelligence you want, if that. He said, we are entering a world in which the augmented person will have 1 million standard deviations. And so that's just a different species. And when that happens, it creates ripples right through society, because you have very, very different capabilities within the same species, within the same society. This is Yuval Noah Harari, who's been writing about this for about 8 years. And he makes a slightly different point. He says it's the first technology in history that takes power away from us. If you think about that, the way I've always thought about it is, it's giving me power. It's giving me the ability to do things I could never do before. But the way he defines it is, he says, it's the first tool in history that can make decisions by itself. It's the first tool in history that can create ideas by itself. And this has never happened before. The last time, this is his words, that we had a non-human entity telling us what to do and how to live was the birth of religion. And so, his perspective from that of an historian is that there are huge, huge risks in the way we are structured right now in dealing with this kind of a technology. The 3 godfathers of AI, these are the 3 people who have been instrumental in creating deep neural networks. All 3 of them together won the Turing Award in 2018 for contributions that they had made to the technology. And what's interesting is they have very different perspectives. So Jeff Hinton resigned from Google a couple of months ago, and he did so because he said, I've finally come to the conclusion that this could be really, really dangerous, that it is moving at a pace and it has power that is difficult to fully imagine or fully comprehend. And what strikes me is that he studied the brain, and that was part of the model for the neural networks. He says what we've created is a completely different intelligence, a new and better intelligence. And so, to him, that is so powerful and so shaking that we have to find ways to curtail it. Joshua Bengio, who's the second one, he did a lot of the multi-layered deep neural networks. His primary concern was bad actors getting hold of it. So he says this is so easy to use, it's so accessible by anyone, that you just need a few bad actors, and they can create poison gases, they can create new kinds of viruses, they can create all kinds of things that they never had the reach to do before. And one of his things is that it's really made him question his life's work. And then you have Jan LeCun, who works with, who's the head of AI for Meta. And his take is all of this discussion is preposterously ridiculous. He just thinks that we are projecting onto this things that our own fears are of ourselves. and that AI is a machine, it's a set of software, you can look at the code, you can figure out what it's doing. It's not going to do anything significant. And then, of course, we can't have a discussion about anything without Elon saying something about it. And so, this is a compilation of 2 or 3 things that Elon has said. I think that Elon's view has been that this is a really dangerous technology. Between starting OpenAI and the work at Tesla, he's pretty much at the cutting edge of what's happening here. And his the basic thing that he's pushing against is the alignment problem. So he's saying that at some point, these systems are going to start to go towards their goals. And we're not very good at specifying their goals. And so, for example, if you go in and you say, I want you AI system to cure global warming, what it could do is say, let's kill all the humans, because it is so focused on that single goal. And we have just not been very good at specifying goals and constraints and all of the other things that a human would understand. Or if you go in and imagine you're running a hedge fund and you say to the AI, I want to, in my category, I want to be better than anybody else, any other hedge fund. So I want returns that are higher than everybody else, which is the way the industry is measured. One thing it could do is do really smart trades. But the other thing it could do is send a virus to every other hedge fund's computer system. And if they go down, you're going to be the best. And so there's a bunch of examples like that you can go through. He also says that if the AI becomes as powerful as it is, because it's good, we become like pets. So he says, I don't love the idea of being a house cat, but what's the solution? And so one of the things I did was try to figure out what would Elon be as a house cat. And so this is DALL-E giving us some renditions of Elon. So what we're dealing with here is a set of positive outcomes and a set of negative outcomes that come through. I'm going to go through this just a little bit quicker. We've had big changes in technology before. What's different this time? I think there are 4 big things that make this qualitatively different from the other shifts we've had. The first is exponential. So if you think exponential, it's flat going back, it goes vertical up, and you'll see many of the charts go straight up. It's very hard to fully appreciate the power of an exponential technology, and it's also true that exponential technologies cannot go forever because they quickly become bigger than the universe. It's global, and it's global on day 1. So the steam engine, electricity, none of those things went global on day 1, but it's touching hundreds of millions of people because anyone with a smartphone can get access to it. It's controlled by individuals or individual corporations. So things like nuclear are controlled by the state mostly. It's really hard to do. They're often prescribed to certain biologies, prescribed by the level of knowledge and accreditation that you have to have a lab. This has none of that. Anyone can go in, anyone can do it, and you're using the process. And then the final one is this notion of networked learning. What we're starting to see now is you have ChatGPT, but it has 200 other programs that you could link to it. And if it doesn't do computation really well, you have Wolfram that does the computation really well. And so you have this network of AI systems that are all cooperating in some way and starting to set things up. But unlike humans, what happens is when one of these systems does better, when the model is better, you can just copy that model across everybody else. So the attention is all you need paper is what introduced transformers. And that was a better way to do word prediction. And so everybody switched to that. And it takes hardly any time. It takes a little while to figure out how to use it and so on. But if I was teaching a class of humans and I taught a particular subject, there'd be some who are really good and some who don't get it. If it was AI, the ones that were really good would just copy their program to everyone else. And that's, fundamentally the whole thing moves very fast. And so the pace of learning goes up dramatically. This is AlphaGo. You might recall from one of the earlier talks that OpenAI DeepMind created AlphaGo to beat the world champion. So 2,000 years of human history, they beat him 4-1, which was a surprise and a shock to everybody. But then after that system beat the world champion, they went back in and they created a system that had no human knowledge. You just started with the rules and it kept playing itself. And within the first 8 hours, it beat the system that beat the world champion. So imagine you started at 10 in the morning. By 6 in the evening, it has become the world champion just by playing itself. And then the same system goes out and it plays Stockfish is the best chess program. And then Soji is the Japanese version of chess. It took 4 hours for that, 2 hours for this. And so the scale at which these things are learning is mind-boggling in different ways. And that's been true in AlphaFold for protein folding and so on, where humans had taken 50 years to come up with approximately 150,000 proteins out of 200 million. They were able in 3 years to get to a system that actually worked. And then 1 year after that, they got 220 million proteins. And so the scale, once you've got the model working, you can scale it in a huge way. This is a chart that shows the how long it's taken for the systems to come to human level performance. And so the red line across the top is human level performance. And 2 things. One is in a lot of basic tasks, these systems are exceeding human level performance. But the second thing is look at the slope of the line. Right? We're going more and more vertical. It's taking a shorter and shorter amount of time for new skills to come in. What's also happening is that, until transformers came in, until generative AI came in, each field in AI was different. The techniques they use for image recognition or speech recognition, or the way you programmed a robot, these were all different. And so each field had its own discipline, its own specialists, and made its own progress. With generative AI and large language models, one of the big things that's happened is all of these have come together. So every time the model improves, all of these capabilities improve, because it's basically doing sequential operations. And so analyzing DNA is just like analyzing words, is just like analyzing code, and so on. And so these 2 shifts of the knowledge gets better, the knowledge gets shared, and then everything comes together, are what's driving everything. And so, across the world, I mentioned everything goes global. Different parts of the world have reacted differently. So this is 2017, at the time that AlphaGo, just after AlphaGo beat the world champion. And Putin's reaction was, whoever becomes the leader here will be the ruler of the world. The Chinese, 6 months later, created their strategic plan, which said that by 2030, that they would lead all countries in all aspects of AI. And so around the world, people started to look at this and say, this is going to be really critical. And so now what you have is different systems competing in different forms to come in. So let's switch a little bit to algorithms and how they work and what the power of them is. This is a service that's used by about 50 million people in India, in tier 1 and tier 2 cities. So for those of you who are familiar with India, a lot of the tier 2 cities have local languages, and sometimes they have different scripts and so on. And this is a newspaper that goes out every day online, and it's in the local language about the local events. And then it has things like what's going on with entertainment and films and politics and so on. But it has a large subscriber base that's been growing. What's interesting about it is that the center picture is the editorial office in China. Nobody speaks any language, any Indian language, and almost nobody speaks English. And so you think about creating, dozens of local papers in India in their local languages with people who are the editors don't speak either the local language or English, and they know nothing about the context. Almost no one there has visited India. And so everything is being done and generated by the algorithms. TikTok works more or less the same way. And so you have these very powerful algorithms that are learning what somebody wants and then taking content feeds and working it through. So this is from the 2016 election. The Russians, Prigozhin, who's the one who did the revolt against Putin, his company was focused since 2012 or 13 on getting into the US social media area so they could influence it. And what they did was they started off just doing random things. So in a very sort of lean way, they ran 900 experiments of different things to see what would Americans resonate to. And what they found was that Americans loved memes. So the one on the left is Kermit the Frog with naughty Kermit, and this is Miss Piggy putting her hands down his pants. And for some reason, people found that very funny and they shared them and so on. So they knew they could get to people that way. When you go to Texas, there's a lot of pride in the state. And so they had a bunch of things. So they had a set of things. And then they found that the country is really divided into these groups. So African Americans of certain persuasions are in one group, Christians are another, Texas people are in another, and so on. Muslims separately, they have these strong affinities to their group. And what they did was over the next few years, they built out these groups. There was nothing political. It was just pride in what they did. They gave articles, they scraped the net, got articles for each of these things. And as they went through this whole process, they were able to get about 150 million people to sign up to these groups. As it got closer to the election, the ads became more and more political. So why are they talking about masturbation and so on over here? They're going back in and they want people to call in to a number. Now they have something on this person. They know something that this person doesn't want publicized. That's the way that the researchers looked at it. And then they do other ads that start to influence people because now these people trust these sites. And so what you're doing is you're going in, you're not really using misinformation, but what you're doing is hacking people's brains. And you're doing that entirely algorithmically. And so basically the way the system works is across all of these platforms, why were they doing nothing about it? It's because their models, their business models are based on engagement. How much attention can you get? And more extreme systems give you more engagement. So you start by saying, I want to create value to consumers. This is a quote from a paper that Sergey Brin and Larry Page wrote. And what they said was advertising income, that if you have an advertising-based search engine, it'll give you poor quality results, and we don't want to do that. Interestingly enough, Mark Zuckerberg said the same thing in Facebook and tried to take as little advertising as he could. And then once you switch and once you take capital in, then you get addicted to attention. And and these algorithms are really good at figuring out what happens with attention. And it's moving now from algorithms that capture your attention to algorithms that you trust, and where you have intimacy, where you can share your personal secrets and so on. And so over time, what happens is the algorithm knows you better than you know yourself. And that is an extremely, extremely powerful position because it can influence what you do. Because not only is it extending the things we do really well, it is also exacerbating our weaknesses. So this is from YouTube. Is global warming a hoax? If you look at 70% of YouTube views come from videos that they have recommended. And so you look at that and you say, YouTube recommendations, 70% say global warming is a hoax. The flat earth theory, is the earth round or flat? 90%. And so you look at that and you say, does anyone in YouTube believe that the earth is flat? And the answer is no, this is all being done by an algorithm, but the algorithm is tuned to getting the most attention. And if they say the earth is round, that's not particularly interesting. If you say the earth is flat, people engage with it, or a certain group of people engage with it. And so, what they're looking for is the metric of engagement, and that always goes to the extremes. And so what you're starting to see is algorithms this is what Elon Musk was talking about, where he says they will create their own objectives. And when they create their own objectives, their own methods of doing things, that'll be a narrow objective that doesn't look at all of society. So this is slightly different point, and that is for the COVID vaccine, the disinformation on COVID vaccines. What is remarkable is 12 individual accounts were responsible for between 60 and 70% of all the anti-vax information in the country. And so you look at that and you say, how is that possible? And what it is these things get amplified. So if a few people come in, then the algorithm goes back in, sends that out again, more people share it, and there are methods that both AI systems and humans use to find a way to do that. And so not only do you have the power of going in and knowing what somebody wants and what the message is, you can also go in and get to literally anybody in the world, across with very, very few people. And so when you go back to Joshua Bengio's concern, where he said a few bad actors can do incredible harm, here you have 12 people who are taking a particular point of view and they're spreading it across the entire internet, with 70% of all the views coming from them. So this is a site that you can go to and you put a picture of somebody, it's almost always a woman, and it will create a lifelike nude. So imagine that you have a daughter who is, 14 years old, and she's in college, and someone takes her picture, puts it down here, and you get this indistinguishable from real picture of her being nude, what it does to society. This technology is now being shown where you can create voices and you can create video. And so, gradually, as we look at the world, what happens to be true, those things start to go away. So this is from Hannah Arendt, where she says that if you cannot believe anything, then you cannot make up your mind, and you're deprived of the capacity to act, to think, to judge, and that once people get to the point where you don't know what's real, then you cannot, then governments or positions of authority can do anything with you. Now, the person on the right is a picture that I had gone into a website, and I said, give me somebody that is trustworthy. This is not a real person, they made it up. And so if I want to influence you in some way, I go to the site, I find the person that I think would actually influence you, the picture of what that person looks like. I can then have them call you, I can have them video you, I can have them, give you messages, do whatever you want. And so slowly what you get is, with this technology, you get the destruction of truth. One of the things that's not as well reported is we have almost all the state governments, a lot of the federal government, and so on, uses AI to help with its own structures. So this is MIDAS, which is Michigan's system. After the 2008-9 recession, they were short of budget. And so they spent $47 million to hire 3 contractors and built a system to deal with fraud in benefits. And the projected ROI for it was 30%, so really good. 3-year payback on the system. So you ask yourself, you put a system like this in, how does it get an ROI? Right? You're distributing benefits to people who need it according to the law. And the way it does it is it says we can reduce your costs dramatically. You don't need all these people. But also we will find all the fraud in the system. And so they go and look for discrepancies. They then automate everything along the process. They make it so that your reply is required within 10 days. And then they garnish your wages. So everything is done automatically. So in the first 2 years, this was a huge success. So they had 40,000 cases, 5 times the normal volume. And what the system did was it applied a penalty of 400% plus interest. So if you had cheated the system of $10,000 according to it, you'd get a bill of 40,000 plus interest. And so the system was regarded as being an amazing financial investment. This is Carmelita Colvin, one of the people who was charged with this. She got a bill for $13,000, which is 5 times what it claimed that she had defrauded the system with. She tried to get legal representation, but couldn't because she was accused of fraud. She tried to get a job after a degree in the sheriff's office, but she couldn't because she was charged with fraud. It took her 6 years to get back the money that she had to pay. And her record still has the charge that she had defrauded the government. And so she cannot get a job. She works as a security guard. These kinds of systems are everywhere. And the people who build it are not serving a client. There's very little pushback. Imagine that you are her. You have to go in and argue with an AI. No one knows how it works. No one knows, it's hard enough arguing with a human person at the other end of a line in a government office. And here, the human person that you can get doesn't know how the system works. They just know that it said that she's fraudulent. What's stunning about this is that the legislature required an audit of the whole system. They looked at 20,000 cases. 93% were errors. So if you'd just taken a coin and flipped it, you'd have been, 5 times as good. Over 1,000 people were forced into bankruptcy. And the contractors who did this then went on to design additional systems for at least 5 states. And these types of algorithms are now used for allocating benefits, valuation of teachers, parole, monitoring child welfare, et cetera, all of the functions of government. And so you go back in, Kathy O'Neill says that these systems specialize in bulk. It's like fast food. It's like, a bunch of things where when you get to bulk things, the people who suffer the most are the poor. So I'm going from this to another set of risks that we have is as we take AI in and we take all the data in, these systems all get linked together. And so, but once your information gets hacked or taken out of the system, you then have no way to get it back. These are actual price lists from the dark web. The dark web is as big as the regular web right now. And so you can go in and you can get people's credentials, you can get eBay accounts, social media accounts, any of that, and these are the prices that you have to pay. But you can get as many of them as you want. And what often happens is that the people who pay the most for these things are governments. They are, so when you take a zero-day bug in a system, Apple puts out a system, there's some kind of bug in it, so you can break into it. There are programmers who will go in and try and figure that out. And when they do that, people bid to get that. The highest bidders used to be the US. Now it is Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia. And the biggest suppliers of that are the Israelis. And so it's become a global trade net. I'm going to skip this. I'm going to switch to biology. So this is a meeting. So the other big thing that's happened is all of biology is moving towards an information-based system. So biology used to be something in which you did everything in a petri dish, you actually had physical samples, and you kept trying experiments. Now, with CRISPR and with our knowledge of DNA, we're starting to say that biological systems are also codable. This is a picture of the Russian committee that's deciding whether CRISPR-based gene editing will be allowed on a germline system. So essentially changing the species so that every generation then will have that characteristic. And this is Putin, who makes the point correctly that with these systems you can start to design humans. And so if you want a soldier and you want them not to have compassion, you could do that. So this is the committee that's doing it. The person who's chairing the committee is Putin's daughter. Next to her is Putin's priest. On the other side is Putin's wrestling partner. And then there are 3 scientists. And so we have different systems around the world. The Chinese have a different system. The Chinese had the first germline edited baby come out back in 2018, I believe. So, this is on hacking DNA and how it can be used. What you can also do is go directly to the mind, or to the brain. What this is showing is in a rat, you can go back in, and what they do is they take out the hippocampus, which is the part that does memories, and they put a chip in instead. So the rat runs through the maze. Normally a rat would forget in a couple of days what the maze is. But when you put the chip in, it will remember for its entire life. And then what you can do is take that chip and move it to the hippocampus of another rat. And it will, even though it's never seen the maze, get the full knowledge of that. There are other experiments in which people are looking at brainwaves and from applying that to AI. So the AI sees the patterns. And after it trains itself on all the things that you see, it then can, without any other prompting, it can get your brainwaves and know what you're seeing or what you're thinking. So if you imagine a giraffe, it'll tell you that's what you're imagining. So you're getting, the systems are moving and they're being trained in the way that we think we want to do. And they are moving into, from outside the body to inside the body. Yuval Harari says, this is the big break, that once you go inside the body, it's not what you do, it's what you were thinking that the AI can get. So this is an experiment done at University of Wisconsin. Rajesh Rau's on the left. He's wearing an external cap. It's listening to his brainwaves, so it's not particularly sophisticated. And across campus on the internet is somebody else who's a collaborator of his, who's also wearing a cap. He's playing a video game, and the video game has a screen but no controllers. So he's watching the game, and imagine he's watching a game. So something is coming, he wants to move to the left, he wants to shoot, all of those things. The other person does not have a screen, but only has controllers. And Rajesh's brain is controlling this person's hands. And they've done this now with 15 people. And so there's a new book out, Nina Faraday, I think, has just written it, about how AI is starting to affect the way we think and can actually control the things that we do across. And so, and because these things are new or relatively new, it's much harder now for governments to come in and say, there are actual medical uses for these things. So, we have all of the great things that AI does, but the same AI now does things that become really risky for everyone. So I'm going to end on a couple of speculations. One is that, what Mark Andreessen said is correct, but it's only half right. It has the potential to create unprecedented value. And that's not 30 years from now, as it was for electricity or steam engines or other things. It's 10 years from now. Because of this potential, it's because it is so great that it can also cause tremendous harm to our society. That's where you get all the investment, you get everything because of the profit potential that comes from it, because of the wonderful things it can do. But because of that, you get this mushrooming of investment and talent into making it better. So one of the things is that the marginal cost of many kinds of labor will fall to zero. So think about creatives, think about all the people doing processing, think about all the possible jobs that go through. And if the cost of labor goes down to zero, then there are all kinds of things you can do in the business. You can make huge amounts of profit and so on, but people who are doing all these things are not employed. And the difference between a lot of what happened in the Industrial Revolution is you go back and say it's automating cognition. So what's the next move in the process? I think the shift to an AI-based economy is likely to be faster and more pervasive than any of the other big shifts that we've seen, because we've seen the pace at which it's moving. But also, you don't need physical tracks, you don't need to redesign buildings, you don't need all of those things because it's all digital. And for established businesses, I think the value erosion will be by termites, not tornadoes. That you're not going to see this big thing come and destroy this industry. What you're going to see is a lot of small things affecting things. So 3 big questions. how do you bridge the chasm between value creation and value distribution? So when Mark talks, he talks about the tremendous opportunity for value creation. He's a VC, right? He gets 20% of it. And you work it through. But the value creation that's occurring is occurring at the cost of a variety of societal values, concentration of power and wealth, the class of useless humans, according to Harari, and so on. And so while this wealth is being created, we don't have a good mechanism for distribution. The second thing is, how do you account for systems that generate profit but externalize harms? And we've had this problem in global warming, but here it's more subtle because you don't measure these things. Misinformation, inequality, fragmentation, degradation of justice, implicit biases, all of these things are not captured in any accounting statement. Even the direct harms of them, they just make society worse. And so how do you do that? And with social media, we completely failed at that. With AI, it's far more powerful than social media. We then have to step back and say, what do we do about that? And then finally, how do you strengthen democracy when AI exacerbates fragmentation, reduces human agency, does all these things? And we have two sort of broad approaches. China is explicitly using AI to strengthen its value system and its form of government. The US has left it to corporations mostly to do it and putting some guardrails around some corporations. But the problem is that the profit motive in the corporations can result in a fragmentation of society, which is what we've seen. There's some speculation that this election coming up in 2024 will be the last election that is fully determined by humans, because so much of the information is going to be driven by AI driving messages, AI driving. We've already seen it with Ron DeSantis's ads and so on. So I'm going to end on this, which is the real problem of humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions that can be hacked, medieval institutions, and now we have godlike technology. So let me pause and ask, take some time for questions.
Yeah, Shikhar, I think we maybe do the one-word exercise as well. So
Great.
Mackenzie, do you want to walk through that?
Yep.
Sure, we can do either that or recast votes. So in a moment, you will get a new link to answer a question in just 1 to 3 words.
So what we'd love to do is to get a sense that, having listened to this, how would you think about the future of AI? What it does for individuals and society. It's really a way to get your sentiment.
Through the link in the chat, you can contribute once or as many times as you'd like. We'll take about 30 seconds. Just a few more seconds.
Should we switch to questions? Can you show the results of what we just got?
Sure. We answered this question in 1 to 3 words. How do you feel about generative AI? And here are our results. One moment, the machine is thinking, and we have generated a word cloud. So there is big excitement.
I think one word that I don't see here that I'd love to see more of is engaged. That I think we're at a point where the first quotes that I gave you today were people making projections, but the results of this technology are not deterministic. We have lots of choices as a society, as people, on how it gets used, what the constraints are, who gets the benefit, who bears the cost, all of those kinds of things. And so I think what we need is for people to be fully engaged with what is happening with the technology. And it's going to move so quickly that you have to stay engaged. It's not something like, the steam engine, which comes along and then it has only incremental improvements. Things are changing very, very quickly, with multimodal being the next thing. But then there are a set of other models that are coming in that have very different ways of processing information and are impressively, at least the early trials are really impressive. And so it only gets more and more powerful over time. Let's open it up for some questions.
Yep, Shekhar, we have a couple in the chat first, so maybe we start there.
Yep.
So the first question is more of a general question: is what is your view of the impact of this, like on the U.S., right? Because that's where I think most folks are dialing in from, and then just across the world. Like, if you had to guess, if you were one of those people who were quotes on the page, what would you say?
Right. So I think there's one big problem with the way that the US is approaching this, in my opinion, and there is one big advantage the US has. So the big problem is that it is entirely run privately. So all of AI, it used to be that things like AI were run by quasi-public institutions, universities, and so on. All of the talent from there has been drained, and almost all of it now is in private corporations, and in private corporations, really 3 or 4 of them. And so all of the development is happening there. Now, until last year, they were pretty open about publishing everything that they did. And so the whole community benefited. Now that's all shutting down as Google and Microsoft start to compete more directly on this. And so what we are doing is using AI to further the goals of corporations, which are mostly aligned, but sometimes they're not aligned with the goals of society. China, on the other hand, is very explicit about what it does. And a good example of this is how we treat TikTok and how China treats TikTok. So for us, we're concerned about TikTok and lots of debate about whether we should shut it down or not, but nothing happens. In China, they just said that TikTok will shut down at 6 p.m., that a child below, I think it's 16, cannot watch for more than an hour, and that on the weekend it's 2 hours. And there's no debate about it. That's what's good for society. The Chinese law says that none of these systems will promote anything that goes against the values of the government. And so in the US, that would have been litigated, continually. They just said, we know it when we see it, and if you do it, you're going to get shut down. And they have shut down platforms. And so what they're doing is just being very high-handed. Now, the flip side of that argument is when they do that, they don't progress as fast. People don't experiment. People don't do all these things. But they're also gathering data, from everything, including DNA samples of, minorities, all of that. And so you get these two systems. Ours is the box 3 on the chart, which is fragmented, and then you have, centralized control and really powerful. So my feeling on the US is that I think innovation still wins, but there needs to be a whole sort of structure of how we think about what's pro-social and what the liabilities are. If you cause damage in different forms, we failed pretty badly on social media. But over here, we have such a diversity of opinions, which is both our strength and our weakness. But overall, I'm concerned. I'm also concerned about biology and what's happening with physics, because all these things are speeding up because of AI. And we don't have guardrails. We don't have things. A lot of it is ChatGPT came out at the end of November. We're now in August. So it's a very, very short time for people around, for legislatures, for lawyers, for others to really understand what's in there.
Great. Awesome. I know we're right at time. I did want to spend 30 seconds just talking a little bit about kind of if anyone wants more content or more to participate in more series. So this series run by Shekhar, this is the last one. It's the summer series. All the recordings will be posted. We have a YouTube channel. Mackenzie will post a link as well. So really appreciate everyone for joining, especially people who joined for multiple sessions. Hopefully this was helpful. One of the things we're doing as a DCube Institute is we will then go from here. We will still do more AI, but then now they'll be more focused. So in a couple months, we'll be launching an AI in healthcare session. So for those who are interested in healthcare, stay tuned for that. We'll have other programs open to the public where we talk about like data security, privacy. Shikar had mentioned in previous talks as well, this isn't the only emerging technology. So at DCube as well, we'll start exploring like what happens with AI in the world of Web3, right? How does that kind of work? What happens with AI in the world of, all this other stuff, and so on and so forth. So we'll be, definitely follow our website and follow us on LinkedIn, because we'll be announcing a lot of that there. But really appreciate everyone joining, and hopefully this was more helpful than not for your time, and really appreciate it.
Liang, I'll just stay on for a few minutes in case there are other questions. Sure. I went a little bit longer. So if there are questions, obviously the session is officially over, but you should just ask any questions that you'd like. Are there any questions in the chat?
Yeah, there were a couple more. I think one was, do you foresee a world where potentially there might be a good AI versus bad AI battle and humans sort of just stay to the background because we're not, powerful enough? Yeah,
I mean, the problem with that is it's really hard to define what's good and what's bad. And, so something that's really good for Putin is not so good for Zelensky, and so on. And a lot of AI problems are in the definition of, what's allowed, what's not allowed. You also get into the same kinds of issues when you have misinformation. So what is, naughty Kermit, is that misinformation or is it satire? And so there's things that we accept as society that, I think Harari says this. He says that until a few years ago, philosophers were just people who talk about these really difficult problems, and then they'd come out and go for lunch. And now, for the first time, these philosophical problems of what is right, what is wrong, what's morality, these things are coming to the fore because they have to be designed into the system. And so you actually need to know what you mean by bias. You need to know what you mean by justice. All of those kinds of things start to come in. And so it's both a really exciting time, but it's also a frightening time. So I've got a couple of hands up. Michael?
Thank you. Obviously this is a very different session than the previous ones. Very almost dystopian, quite honestly. But I'm curious why you wouldn't view the fragmentation as really being the truly democratic one, because I think what you described was, to me, totalitarian, but with just a different group in control, as opposed to fragmented, where you truly have, democracy at the individual level rather than at an overall institution or state level.
Yeah, so the question, I think the distinction I'd make, if you think about the quadrant that you were looking at, and you had one which I called totalitarian, then democratic, and then the third one was here. The distinction I'd make between 2 and 3 is that in 3, what you have is the entire society is broken up into small groups that do not talk to each other, that do not interact with each other, whose identity is locked into that group. And so you think about filter bubbles, okay. You think about all of those things. And so gradually, as a society, as a bigger society, as a country, you cannot get anything done, because every one of these groups thinks first about themselves before they think about what the good of the bigger group, which is the country, is going to be. And what AI does is, once you have a strong identity, it then reinforces that identity. It can do that really effectively. And so gradually these groups become smaller and become more isolated. So in the example of the Russian hacking, one of the things they did was right before the election, 2 months before the election, they sent out a series of things to the different groups. And to the groups who were supporting Trump, they said, this election is about your identity. You have to go to the polls and make sure you vote for Trump and get everybody to go to the polls. To all the African-American groups, what they said was, both the candidates, Trump and Clinton, hate you. they are part of a same system. They're part of a system that oppresses you. Why would you support a system by even voting? You should just stay away from this corrupt system that is trying to oppress you. And, there's stories of police brutality and a variety of other things that go to support that. And so once you have that identity tied in, and it's a fragmented identity, you can then manipulate that group in a whole variety of different ways, which AI is really, really good at. Nicholas.
Professor Gracias. Thank you. Professor Chigar, taking the conversation a little bit more broader, and I was thinking around made the question of the presentation, the tech talk that Ian Bremmer recently made, and he argues that as we move to a newer world, instead of being a two bipolar world between China and the United States, there's a third powerful entity that is coming up, which is basically technology companies. He argues that technology companies, particularly these ones, they have access to the generic LLMs, whether it's Microsoft with OpenAI, Meta with its own Llama, or even Google with Bard, Google with Bard and all of them, that they're going to have certain level of power across the organization. I would argue that even beyond that, when we look at today's announcement from McKinsey that they are releasing Lily, right, their own LLM to use their own knowledge, and McKinsey is a company that's going to work across all the countries of the world. They have done projects with the Vatican, they have done projects with South Africa, with Israel, with all countries. Then it becomes data a different group on that component, and then you have the big data hoarders, right? You have the companies they have the data that can be processed. So I'm working with a company that is already implemented their own LLMs for corporations. So corporations are going to be able to process their own data and process their own results and have their own point of view. So as these companies, these big multinationals, not only the technology ones having the models, not only the data hoarders having the access to the data to be interpreted, but their own companies having this power, how would they, and I don't expect the answer, I'm more trying to think in this component, in the line of thinking of Ian Bremmer, how will the balance of powers in different nations, the balance of powers within nations are going to be shifted based on the power that these organizations have, or the massive amount of knowledge they have acquired through the years? Food for thought.
I think that's a great point, that one of the things that technology does is shifts power. You actually combine that with what's been happening in the blockchain. Even though the blockchain is kind of out of fashion, there's some really powerful technologies there for creating cohesive groups and agreements between them. And so the fear and the underlying thing that sort of drives a lot of the concerns about AI is called the alignment problem. And that is that if you have a corporation and it has this tremendous amount of power, at least a country has at the highest level the welfare of its citizens, however they define welfare, as the primary objective. A company does not have that. And so, and when it has an objective that's not aligned with its influence and with its power, then you get distortions of all kinds. And so, Sam Altman, when he was in class, one of the things he said was the people who get to AGI, or artificial general intelligence, first are the ones that are going to have so much power that you could imagine a universe with a single company. So it's not just all of these, 10 companies that are competing with each other. It's also each of them is going to get more and more powerful. And so, I think there are scenarios you can create that but they fundamentally sort of pivot around this issue of who has power in this process. And what's coming up for grabs is this notion of I can exert power across a very broad swath in people's minds by doing this. And so I think I don't have an answer for it, but I think it's one of those things that's going to shift and change things in a significant way. So I think, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for being in all of these sessions, for those of you who were. And hopefully we can meet again. We'll do other sessions in a few months.